Topic B. Agricultural revolution sparks trade and contact. Now, the questions that we're going to be asking ourselves during this time period uh, is how did changes in agriculture and trade lead to the growth of towns and commerce? These are some of the most basic questions that we ask in history. How does change in something as simple as agriculture here lead to cities and towns as well as trade, which is also known as commerce? And that's a theme that we'll see over and over again. So once again, topic B here, you should be on a new presentation file in Google Docs, meaning you should have a Google presentation, and you should format it as we have been speaking about in class. Our first item is that the population of this area of Europe is going to increase. Okay, the population is going to nearly triple from this time period of about 1,000 to about 13,000, 1,300, excuse me. And the question is, once again, why? Why do we have this increase in population? Okay, and it's going to come from a few things. It's going to come from improved technology and production methods. Okay, we're going to explain those very briefly and get to the trade and commerce. Now, as we spoke about before, the lords, who are the vassals, the dukes, the counts, those who are granted what we called fiefs, okay, those areas of land that they are in control of and which many or several manors may fill up this particular area of land called a fief. And they're going to try to enlarge their fields, plant more crops. And the way they're going to do this is with a new technology known as the iron plow. The iron plow will replace the wooden plow, which they had been using in uh, Europe up to this point in time. And the wooden plow was not as successful. You can imagine why. And the iron plow now is stronger. It is able to dig into the harder dirt of Northern Europe. Okay, we want to keep in mind where we are. We're in Northern Europe, and they are going to need something that will dig deeper, so they'll be able to grow a more variety of fruits. They are also going to use a new system in planting their fields. It's called the three-field system, and it's very important. The If they were to take, let's say, an area, okay, we'll just draw a triangle here, and if they were to take an area and cut it in half, and they plant one area here and one area here, eventually the soil is going to give way. Eventually the soil is no longer going to be able to produce. But if they add a third area through either chopping down trees or through reclaiming swamp-like areas, okay, they're going to be able to have more land, and thus they're going to be able to use this fallow system, meaning by fallow, they're not going to use a field in one particular year. They're going to let it rest. That's what fallow means. Also, during this agricultural revolution of sorts, they are going to use faster moving horses rather than the traditional oxen that they were formerly using. Oxen are larger animals, they do not work as quickly, and horses, if trained properly, will pull the plows, and the result will be an increase in crop production. And that is exactly what the peasants want. That is exactly what their lords here want. Okay, so everyone is going to make out better with this use of improved technology and production methods. Moving on. What this leads us to is a revival of trade. What do we need first in order to have trade? As we learned before, we are going to need some surplus of goods. And since we have a surplus of whatever it may be, wheat, beans, uh, whatever was grown during this period, they would be able to trade. Now, there are other things that they would also get into in different areas. For example, in Greece and in southern Italy, they would be able to grow olive trees, which was always valued, even back to ancient times. But speaking more in northern Europe, these large manors would be somewhere located near roads or rivers. And as such, they would become stops along the famous trade routes to the Middle East and Asia. These famous trade routes are what we are going to refer to as the Silk Road. Now, the Silk Road trade is a little more involved than just stops along these manor houses, but this is what we are eventually going to be looking towards. Okay. Due to the reduction in feudal warfare, okay, so the amount of warfare, as we said, between the kingdoms, trying to gain land, a reduction in foreign invasions. Now, this is within Europe. That is all going to decline. And people, mostly of upper classes, who will be known as our merchant classes, are going to begin to feel a bit safer as they head off and travel for trade, and in some cases, simply traveling for adventure. Also, the idea of the Crusaders, who brought back luxury goods. And these are things that the Europeans might be interested in. Things like eventually silk itself. There are spices. There are a number of different things that people will be interested in, and it will turn these manor houses, these manors or villages, if they are located in the right place, into cities that will become trade centers. Now, another way for trade centers to be created is by the granting of charters for new towns. Now, what would happen here with charters is that wealthy merchants would go to the king and suggest, with a payment in mind, for new towns to be created along roads, okay, or other travel routes such as rivers, along roads and rivers, which are going to be very very important. And these kings, always interested in the bottom line and making money, they are going to want to, you know, gain from the investment, and they are going to allow for this trade to take place. What did it mean for a particular area to be granted a charter? And this is from your textbook, and we see the example of a charter actually right here. Uh, we can find an example of a charter, and we'll speak about that in class. But what we really want to look at here, and this is an example of medieval art. And what we have here are people, and I want you to think about how people are dressed in the image and what they seem to be trying to do. What are they interested in? And also look at the buildings that surround where they are, okay? As compared to some other buildings that we're going to see. Look at the architecture. Look at the structure that they have, and particularly give credence to perhaps that building right there, because it will come in handy, and we will discuss this more in class. So the charters for towns and cities changed the way people tend to live. These were settlements, as we said, created, okay, along trade routes. So they have that connection, and they were developed by economic factors. They're developed simply because they could provide access points to traders, okay? And these eventually became the new hubs of commerce, whether or not these towns and cities were already there, or whether they lived, they existed prior to. Okay, what you see to the left here is an image of a small medieval town, perhaps even before this trade might develop and travel. They were traditionally, as we spoke about the manners, within stone walls, having small streets with houses built up. And then as the shops came along, shops would be on the first floor and the people would live above them. Now, that raises the question, what happens to this group of people who we formerly thought of as serfs or peasants tied to the land? They are sometimes let go or freed because the economy was changing. No longer did you need as many people to work the land, and so they needed to move to the cities where there were opportunities. So this is going to happen all over Europe, but it happens first in the areas of northern Italy and an area called Flanders, which is even north of that, uh, in close to Amsterdam. But these are where homes like this, okay, and roads like this, you see that not much room to get by here, So this was really horse and cart travel, and different artisans, and we'll talk about what type of artisans would take up shop here, and then they would of course live above in these quarters up here. Okay, next. Now, just to give you an idea of trade during this particular period, I'm going to point out the idea of just exactly where most of the trade is going to. And it's interesting if we mention the fact that it's 1,000, we know that there are going to be uh, Muslims who are going to control much of this area here, right? Much of the North African coastline, okay, and even into Spain, okay. Uh, they are going to be areas that are controlled by Muslim traders, and uh, look at the amount of trade routes that begin, let's say, here in England, in Winchester, let's say here in the cities and towns, okay, between France, maybe in Holy Roman Empire. Florence is going to be a big town. Venice is going to be a big player in this, okay? And then we also have some Catholic areas of the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, Castile, Aragon, okay? They are going to be uh, also involved in this trading system. So it spreads all out. It goes to the Middle East. It goes to Middle East being this area here. We're going to call, okay. It goes to the North African coast. And also, there are roads that will trade to Russia. Okay, Kiev, city today in Russia. Um, but you see the big hubs here: Constantinople, Alexandria. Okay, and the last thing I'd like to point out is this to China. That is the Silk Road that I spoke about earlier, and it will allow traders, merchants, and traders to go across the continent of Asia and reach China with stops along the way. But this was quite a revolution, as you might imagine. So, on to the next slide with the commercial revolution. What was needed in order for this, in fact, to happen? Okay, so in order to travel across long distances to connect the Far East to China, to India, they would it would mostly be an overland, or what we call the Silk Road. Now, these merchants and traders were fearful of the issues that could affect them. Marauders, thieves could in some way hinder their safety. Of course, you took your life into your own hands. And it was very dangerous to cross over the Far East over that amount of land, particularly if you were traveling with expensive goods. So, from this leads to new business practices. Uh, Number one, we're going to have ideas of corporations, but also of what we call credit. The first examples of credit are going to be taken out of here. What happens with partnerships, they're going to start the first corporation, and merchants are going to gather together and they're going to pool their money. They're going to put their money together in order so that they can lessen uh, the danger that they have in losing it or their risk. So by doing so, they lower their risk and hopefully increase the profit. That's what they were hoping for. In addition to that, we have this idea of insurance. The idea of insurance is pretty much the same as it is today. You buy insurance on your home. You have fire insurance on your home. Everyone has car insurance. It's a state law. And the practice came to be because merchants during this period were concerned about losing whatever goods they were trading in. Uh, they were concerned about losing them to thievery, as I said, to eventually to the Mongol invasions of these areas, and this is going to help also in lowering the risk. It has a few results. It's going to lessen the dependence on serfdom, like we talked about before, um, and it's going to increase the need for workers such as those who would be willing to travel, okay? Those who would be able to take care of the animals, those who would be willing to cross the great expanse of this reason and pretty much, you know, hopefully able to go beyond and and make a profit, which is in the end what individuals were looking for at this time. Now, one last thing to say. Christians were barred from charging interest on money. However, Jews were not. So during this time period, banks and uh, other areas for credit were often led by the Jewish population. Okay, so if you needed credit in order to uh, move from one area to another, it was many times the Jewish population who allowed for this to happen. They were the ones who would be able to write a piece of paper and you could, you say you could deposit 100 shillings in a bank in, let's say, London, and you could cash it at a different branch in a bank, say, in Venice. And this is the idea of credit and money lending. And it was very, very important to the idea of the commercial revolution, because without it, there would be no safety in, crossing over these large areas of land. Finally, we have a change in the classes. The rise of the middle class. By about 1000 AD, there is going to be a new merchant class formed from the people between the nobility and the priests and the peasants. And that middle class, named appropriately, will be made up of merchants, traders, artisans, those who have some sort of skill that they can offer to this new type of economy. They are going to be dubbed this social class, and they are pretty much going to be uh, disliked by definitely the people at the top, the nobility, who do not enter into you know, things for raising money or getting into trade or becoming merchants. The nobility certainly would not become artisans. So we have this middle class ranked between nobility and peasants, and they would eventually, okay, not at first, but eventually, because of the economic force that they had, that would lead to political force, okay, in the medieval towns, and then as it goes out into these regions, um, their money would allow them to gain popularity, and their voice would eventually be heard if they were perhaps able to um, purchase pieces of art and do things for culture, as we will see in our next unit, which will be on the Renaissance. Some of these merchants and artisans are going to gather together and form guilds. Okay, it was these merchants and artisans who were interested in combining forces with each other, merchants with merchants, artisans, and like artisans. For example, blacksmiths with blacksmiths and roofers with roofers, um, basket weavers, and such. Um, it was a long road. By difficult, we mean it was a long road to become a guild member. Uh, but the first step was an unpaid apprenticeship. Let's listen to the experience of a apprenticeship contract. Okay, I guess that's not going to work. You can read that at the beginning of section 7.4, or you can, we'll see if we can do that in class. Finally here, women. When we speak about women during this period, they are going to have their own guilds, and they're going to work on smaller crafts, uh, things that still were needed perhaps around the house, pottery maybe, um, but not quite as large projects, and it was done more from the house, something that will be known as cottage industries, and they will also be a force in producing materials. And we end with this slide, which didn't get to make it in to the to class today, and hopefully you'll be able to learn a little bit from it with the different periods here, how feudalism is going to spread 700s to 1000s, and how there is this movement towards the agricultural revolution, sort of puts it in frame. And then finally, and give you an idea of the types of things that all sorts of people might be interested in. So this is entertainment for free time, something such as you can read here. It's also in your textbook, and that would be ice skating. So that explains topic B, the agricultural revolution, and how it sparks trade and contact throughout most of Europe. Thank you for your attention.